In this episode, we talk about the first day of the 18th Lok Sabha session and what made it different from the previous ones under the NDA government. We also talk about India wanting to include yoga as an Olympic sport. But first, we talk about why Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal continues to be in jail despite a trial court granting him bail last Thursday. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Arvind Kejriwal, who was first arrested nearly 100 days ago in connection with the alleged excise policy scam, was granted bail by a trial court last week. However, this order was put on hold after the Enforcement Directorate, the agency investigating the scam, approached the Delhi High Court. Since then, the Chief Minister has moved the Supreme Court, which will be hearing the matter on Wednesday. Indian Express's Apurva Vishwanath, who writes on law for the paper, now joins us to discuss why the trial court granted Kejriwal bail and why the High Court put a stay on it. Apurva, Kejriwal has essentially been arrested because ED says that he was vicariously liable in the now scrapped excise policy case. Could you remind our listeners what that means when they say he is vicariously liable?
So the money laundering case against Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal is that he is both directly involved in money laundering and also vicariously liable for money laundering because he's the Chief Minister of Delhi, under whose supervision the excise policy was framed. So essentially that he created a means to generate tainted funds or whatever is allegedly the proceeds of crime. And the other aspect is that he is, as the convener of the Aam Aadmi Party, the proceeds of crime were allegedly spent for an election in Goa. So again, as being vicariously liable for the Aam Aadmi Party, the ED has booked Kejriwal and subsequently they also booked the Aam Aadmi Party itself. So this is pretty much the money laundering case against Arvind Kejriwal.
And previously, after spending about 50 days in jail, Kejriwal had got bail, mainly so that he could campaign for the Lok Sabha polls. Now, recently, a Delhi court granted him bail, but it was later denied by the High Court. Now, we have discussed this in the past as well, that in an ED case, the bar for getting bail is very high. So could you talk about why the Rouse Avenue court in Delhi decided to grant him bail?
So what we saw in May where Kejriwal was released was essentially on interim bail. That was a very short arrangement made by the Supreme Court in, let's say, extraordinary circumstances. That there were the Lok Sabha polls around the corner and there was also Arvind Kejriwal as the head of a national political party and he had to be released for a limited time for campaigning. Of course, the Supreme Court was at that time hearing a case challenging the legality of his arrest, right? Kejriwal's lawyer's case, which has moved from the trial court to the High Court and then to the Supreme Court, is that his arrest itself was illegal, that he was not required to be arrested by the ED. So that is still pending. So the Supreme Court has reserved orders, heard the case, and has reserved orders. In the meantime, the Supreme Court said if you want, you can pursue bail as an other remedy that he's entitled to in the trial court. So his lawyers approached the Rouse Avenue court for regular bail is what we call it, which is essentially you say that I'm no longer required to be kept in custody. You've taken my statements and I will be available for trial. So grant me regular bail. But in the case of money laundering, wherever the ED comes into picture, the parent legislation, the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, has a very high bar for bail. We've discussed this so many times with our listeners. The provision itself, that is Section 45, starts with a bar against granting of bail to courts. Right? It says that no court can grant bail and then sets out to list a couple of exceptions when bail can be granted. Right? So you can imagine the seriousness of the legislation, the intent of the legislation, where it says bail is not the ordinary recourse here.
Right. And in that regard, there is this twin test that courts are required to apply in PMLA cases when deciding to grant bail. Could you tell us what this twin test is supposed to be?
So first, the court has to be satisfied that the accused prima facie is not guilty. The second leg of that test is that the accused should not be likely to commit this offense or any new offense while on bail. And of course, the usuals that he should not be a flight risk and those things also apply. So both these parts have to be addressed in order to get bail. So, and how do you prove to the court that you're not guilty? That's what a trial is supposed to do essentially, right? So a bail hearing in a PMLA case is essentially a mini trial to check if prima facie the accused is guilty or not. So here the judge is required to apply the same test and grant bail.
Okay, so considering this, what did the judge who granted Kejriwal bail say about what made her take this call?
So there are 3 broad reasons that the judge cites here. This is Judge Nyay Bindu, who was actually allotted this case during the vacation. So this is essentially a vacation roster that the judge was hearing. And it's a 26-page short order. And you look at how the reasoning is structured, 3 key issues come to light. One is, of course, the judge highlights that time and again, the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice of India have said that trial court judges are being reluctant to grant bail, right? So she cites this encouragement of the Chief Justice for trial court judges and to grant bail. So she says, I have the power to grant bail. Then the second aspect is, of course, where the judge is, I think, trying to refer to the second limb of the twin test that we discussed about Arvind Kejriwal's standing, whether he's likely to commit this offense in future or whether he is likely to jump bail and leave the country. There, the judge quotes from the Supreme Court's observations while granting interim bail, right? In that order, the Supreme Court says that Arvind Kejriwal is the Chief Minister of Delhi and the convener of a national political party. Those words carry some weight, or that's how it's construed in the Supreme Court judgment. So Judge Nyay Bindu also refers to those words and says Arvind Kejriwal is not a threat to society. So this satisfies, say, the second part of the twin test. Now, on the first part, what the judge says is there are reasons to believe that the ED is yet to establish guilt against Kejriwal. So she's not saying that he's not guilty prima facie. She's saying the ED is yet to make its case against Kejriwal. So essentially poking holes in the ED's theory that Kejriwal is vicariously liable.
Okay, so according to Nyay Bindu, Kejriwal passes the twin test. Talk about what happens next. What is the reason that when the matter reaches High Court, it ends up denying Kejriwal bail?
So as soon as the bail was granted, in fact, the bail was pronounced sometime in the evening around 8:30 at night. And the next day, the order was made available. But even before the order was made available, the Enforcement Directorate moved to the High Court and said this bail should be cancelled. Right? So the ED's main case is that, of course, even in the trial court, they fought tooth and nail and opposed bail. But in the High Court, when you move for, say, cancellation of bail, right, that bar is also quite high. The order has to be so perverse, as we say in legal language, that it has to be cancelled, that it cannot stand. So the Delhi High Court, of course, heard the case. Again, the Delhi High Court is also due on vacation. So there was a vacation bench, which means this bench has a fresh set of judges, somebody who's not heard Kejriwal's case so far at all. So this bench heard the case and, for an entire day till 4:30 p.m., the arguments went on. Kejriwal's lawyers made their response. Then the ED, again, Additional Solicitor General S.V. Raju appeared and made his rebuttals as well. After that, the court reserved the case for orders, which means they didn't give orders immediately. The court said, we would like to read everything on the record and then make a decision. Also, they gave ED time till 24th June, that is Monday, to submit its written statements and, responses and stuff. So after that, the High Court was going to take a call, but we don't know when exactly that is. But Shashank, this is also quite rare, because during vacation, matters that require urgency are listed. But that urgency is usually in terms of, say, granting bail. Say there is an eviction case. A cancellation of bail is not generally one of those. And this is a point that Kejriwal's lawyers also made in court. That, there is no tearing hurry in this case for a vacation bench to hear it. But nonetheless, the High Court has heard and reserved the case for orders. In the meantime, Kejriwal's lawyers, of course, moved to Supreme Court. Because for what it's worth, Kejriwal has been granted bail 4 days ago. And he still continues to be in Tihar jail.
Right, and the Supreme Court will now hear this matter on Wednesday. But talk a bit about the uniqueness of this situation and what exactly the Supreme Court will be looking at.
So it's a tricky situation for the Supreme Court because there is another constitutional court which has reserved the case for orders. So had they even moved while the case was still being heard, the Supreme Court could have stepped in and probably transferred the case and heard it itself. But now that the High Court has reserved for orders, the Supreme Court stepping in is not proper. So the Supreme Court has told Kejriwal's lawyers to come back once the High Court pronounces an order. Of course, the Supreme Court also in observations mentioned that it is unusual for the High Court to reserve a case like this, which is of cancellation of bail, for 2-3 days. But to be sure, we don't know how many days, but so far it's been 2-3 days since the High Court reserved the case for orders.
And Apurva, based on the ED's case, has there been a direct connection established between Kejriwal and the money laundering that was allegedly going on in the excise policy case?
So in the larger case, the ED of course says that about 100 crores was received by the Aam Aadmi Party as kickbacks from the quote-unquote South group, which is, say, a Telangana-based distilleries or liquor business owners who paid bribes to the Aam Aadmi Party. So this 100 crores, the ED's case is that, was used in the Goa election campaign. So does this link Kejriwal directly? No. But the ED does say in court, and has said it in several occasions, that some of the accused contacted Kejriwal on WhatsApp, or they claim to have screenshots of this. So is there a direct link of Kejriwal taking the money, receiving the money, facilitating this? Not so far. This direct link is very crucial because a direct link is what will bind Kejriwal to the case. Or a direct link between the Aam Aadmi Party and, the money trail. Even then, this vicarious liability in ED will be a hotly contested issue. And I'm fully expecting it to be litigated all the way up to the Supreme Court whenever it is put to test.
And next we talk about the Olympics. For some time now, India has been competing to host the 2036 Olympics. And it turns out that along with sports like T20 Cricket, Kabaddi, chess, squash and Kho Kho, India also wants to include yoga in the tournament. This is what a 6-page summary of recommendations for the 2036 Olympics accessed by Indian Express's Mihir Vasavdatalks reveals. In this segment, we speak to Mihir about these recommendations and how the Olympic Committee makes its decisions. Mihir, compared to these other sports that it's pushing for, yoga does seem like a bit of a stretch to be considered as a sport. Since when has India had this idea to include yoga in the Olympics?
If we have to go back and kind of put our fingers on one particular date, then it would be mid-December last year. In October was when Prime Minister Narendra Modi officially declared India's interest to host the 2036 Olympics. And then 2 months later, there was a meeting of the Sports Authority of India. And in those meetings, it was discussed, this idea of having yoga as one of the 6 sports which can be kind of explored and pitched for the Olympics if at all India get to host it.
And is it going to be treated as gymnastics essentially, that you get points for how well you perform an asana? Do we know anything about that?
Absolutely no idea, because yoga isn't practiced as a sport right now. So we don't know what shape or form it will be when it actually, if at all, it becomes a sport. So there are multiple layers, right, to how a sport becomes an Olympic sport. First of all, there's a big debate whether yoga is a sport or it's just an activity. And if it then classifies as sport, and I think, if I'm not wrong, the Indian Olympic Association recognizes Yoga Federation of India as one of the federations, so to say. But there is no international yoga federation which is recognized and affiliated to the International Olympic Committee. So these are all very boring bureaucratic hurdles that a sport has to cross to even being considered to be a part of the Olympics.
But Mihir, could you talk about what are some of the things that an Olympic Committee considers while including a sport in the Olympic cycle? What are the factors it considers?
There are multiple factors. The list is too long, but in a nutshell, if you were to look at a few really important points, it would be the popularity of the sport, whether it's being played in, if not a majority or, high majority of the world, but in a considerable part of the world to make it competitive at the Olympics. But what happens, Shashank, is that now with the new rules that have been come into force in the last few years, say starting from the Tokyo Olympics, the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, gives the host country some flexibility to add sports of their choice. So you have a set menu, so to say, of sports which can't be kind of tinkered with. That's the prerogative of the IOC, where they'll decide whether to add, remove and all those things. And then a host country gets to choose any sport of their liking, depending on what's popular over there. This is broadly to kind of get the excitement levels going in their own country and their region. So then if you look at the Tokyo Olympics, you had a sport like karate, which wasn't in the Olympics earlier, but got included. You saw baseball returning to the Olympic fold in Tokyo. Then if we look at the LA Olympics in the coming year, you will see something like a flag football, which we don't know what it is in India, but it's a big deal in the US. Similarly, they've also added T20 cricket because of the South Asian diaspora over there. So every host nation gets to pick and choose their own sport. They have a freedom of up to 2, 3, 4 sports in that sense. And that's the area where India is trying to push some of these sports in.
And Mihir, when we talk about these other 5 sports that India wants to include, have they been in the running in the past? Especially when we look at T20 cricket or squash or even chess for that matter, because at least when it comes to chess, we know that the conversation is not new. Although when you Google why chess is not included, chess.com says that the reason is that the Olympic Games do not have board games.
Yeah, so chess kind of splits opinion in that sense. It's a board game, mind game, brain game, whatever you can classify it. Many people will go to an extent to argue even whether chess is a sport. So, that's something which will continue to raise debate. But there are 2 sports, T20 cricket and squash, which are already in the Olympic fold for the next games. That's in 2028. Both sports will be featuring, cricket will be returning after more than a century. Squash will be played for the first time. So those 2 sports are already in. So you can kind of guess that if India, big ifs, if India were to win the hosting rights for 2036 Olympics, then getting these 2 sports will be relatively easier depending on how they perform at the Los Angeles Games, because sports performance is also taken into consideration before their addition, subtraction and all those things. With regards to Kabaddi, it's a sport which kind of thrills. We've seen with the Kabaddi League and at the Asian Games that it continues to be a popular sport at multidisciplines and within India. Great following in terms of the numbers, the way it's played, thrill and etc. And that leaves us with Kho Kho and yoga, both sports which, traditionally or in normal circumstances you wouldn't associate with the Olympics. But that's the thing with the games, with the evolving patterns of it. It's tough to guess which sport will make it eventually and which won't.
And Mihir, when we look at the recommendations, what are the things that India wants besides getting these 6 sports included?
These 6 sports, of course, are, it's like the jazzier part of the proposals, right? That's your eye-catching bit. But then, when you kind of go through the document, there are some really important points which might not be having a mass appeal as seeing, say, yoga as a sport, but they're extremely important in an Indian context. So something like the need to have safe environment, a safe playing environment, kind of, making athletes, officials, players aware of the POXO Act, the POSH Acts, something which in the last few years, through the whole wrestling protests and before that, we've seen that the awareness on ground is absolutely minimal. So that's an issue which has been addressed, that there is a need to make it safe, the environment safe. The other big issue that kind of affects Indian sport, that's been eating the Indian sport from inside, is the doping menace. Now, in the last available report of the World Anti-Doping Agency, which is, I think, the year 2022, India was the country with the highest number of doping sanctions. It beat Russia, it beat Italy. So that's a big issue at a grassroots level to the senior most level of elite sport. That they've said that, by the ways of having more surprise tests, by visiting and raiding the athlete performance centers, training centers, you kind of catch hold of those who are trying to cheat. That's one issue. The other issues are, developing coaches and referees so that you have a very solid base level systems in place and building more infrastructure. Of course, there are a few other points, but these are some of the more important ones.
And in the end, we talk about the first session of the 18th Lok Sabha, which began yesterday. Now, the session in the lower house started with an oath-taking ceremony for the newly elected members, including Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
मैं नरेंद्र दामोदर दास मोदी जो लोकसभा का सदस्य निर्वाचित हुआ हूं, ईश्वर की शपथ लेता हूं कि मैं विधि द्वारा स्थापित भारत के संविधान के प्रति सच्ची श्रद्धा और निष्ठा रखूंगा। मैं
Now, compared to the previous sessions under the Modi-led NDA government, this one has a much stronger opposition. As you already know, in the recent general elections, the BJP had failed to secure a majority, winning only 240 seats.
See, since Prime Minister Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister in 2014, the BJP had simple majority.
That's Indian Express's deputy editor Liz Mathew, who reports on the BJP for the paper.
That happened after a long time because even in the UPA too, when the Congress had a good number, its number was only 207 and no party had majority for almost 2 decades.
And so when the BJP had won a majority in 2 consecutive elections, according to Liz, the party was jubilant.
Now, on February 10, when the last day of the 17th Lok Sabha met, the BJP had a special discussion on Ram Temple after the January Pran Pradishta of Ram Temple in Ayodhya. And it was all chants of Jai Shri Ram, Char So Par. This was what the scene we saw last in the new building.
This was the parliament with a fairly weak opposition, especially given that more than 140 MPs were suspended for disrupting proceedings in the last winter session.
So, we saw a kind of an opposition which was almost didn't have much voice. And from that to this session, the first day of the 18th session, it just bore a very drastically different look. Even before the session started today morning, even on Monday morning, before the MPs went in, I was noticing, most of the opposition MPs were walking in as if they got 400 and the BJP MPs were walking as if they lost the election.
And Liz says that the first day of the parliament is usually very somber and calm. MPs are meeting after a long time and the new members are excited to enter the historic building and take their oaths.
And most of them will come in their traditional attires. Okay, all these things were there. The Assam MPs were having the red and white stole. TDP MPs were having their yellow signature stole. And other SP MPs were having the red stole. All these things. But the atmosphere was not at all friendly. Atmosphere was of a hostility. Because before the house started today, the first day, opposition took out a protest demonstration in this place where the Gandhi statue was there, which is also relocated to further away to the backyard.
She says that opposition members came together with copies of the constitution, which were distributed by the Congress party.
संविधान की रक्षा हम करेंगे हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन लॉन्ग लिव आवर कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन लॉन्ग लिव संविधान का रक्षा कौन करेंगे संविधान की रक्षा कौन करेंगे संविधान की रक्षा हम करेंगे.
She says when it came to the opposition, the Samajwadi Party was the one that really stood out, having increased its seats from 8 to 37. She says in this first session, party chief Akhilesh Yadav ensured that their MP from Ayodhya, Avidesh Prasad, sat alongside senior leaders like Rahul Gandhi and Kalyan Banerjee.
So it was like a very emboldened, vibrant, aggressive opposition. A very subdued BJP was visible today in the house.
She says what happened yesterday signals what the session might be like going forward. For example, the first point of contention arose when the NDA picked the pro tem speaker, who serves as a temporary speaker before the House elects a permanent one through a simple majority. The opposition was hoping that the 8-term Congress MP Kudukunil Suresh would be chosen for this role. But the NDA instead selected the 7-term MP Bhartrihari Mehtab, who had joined the BJP only 3 months ago.
And he was selected to be or nominated to be the pro tem speaker. So in the first moment itself, when he came in, the opposition started shouting, And the opposition pulled out its members. 3 of the senior opposition MPs, just K. Suresh, T.R. Balu, and Sudeep Bandyopadhyay, T.R. Balu of DMK and Sudeep Bandyopadhyay of TMC. 3 were also nominated, but 3 of them pulled out. So, leaving only BJP MPs, Bhagan Singh Kulaste and Radha Mohan Singh, to be on the chair while the MPs are taking oath. So, that was the first kind of, hiccup.
She says later, when PM Modi stood up to take his oath, opposition leaders, including Rahul Gandhi, raised copies of the constitution and chanted slogans in protest. And protests also took place when Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan took his oath.
So we know that this issue of NEET, the irregularities in the competitive exam is actually, kind of overshadowing everything. The government is under fire. Of course, it is about the future of students and the youth. So obviously, nobody can justify what happened. This government is in a very defense mode now. So I think what is coming, now Tuesday when the oath taking is completed, there will be a speaker's election. On Thursday, there will be presidential address to the joint house where the government's policy, kind of what the government intended to do, will be announced. And there will be a thanks motion debate, a debate on the motion of thanks to the president, during which the opposition has this opportunity to kind of quote unquote expose the government, attack the government on several issues like NEET, the train accidents, the encounters in Jammu and Kashmir. And there is series of issues for the opposition Congress and the opposition now. When the BJP has brute majority, it is different. They can push any bill, they can push any discussion, they can push anything. It is not going to happen in this house.
This is considering how emboldened the opposition is at the moment with its numbers increased in the house.
The thing is that, since the treasury benches do not have the kind of confidence it used to have in 2014 and 19, one has to wait and watch how they are going to do the floor management. Before that, there is another issue coming up, the election of the speaker and the deputy speaker. Conventionally, again, deputy speaker post should be given to the opposition, but the government had indicated it is not in that mood. Again, there will be confrontation. So let's see what is it going to be.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.